Today we are talking about war tapes. Now anybody that's been playing Battlefield for a decent while probably already knows that one of the first things you do when you launch a new Battlefield title is go into your audio settings and enable the war tapes mix. And this feature's been around for quite a while. It's actually been around longer than I realized it was. Based on a quick Google search, it seems like Bad Company 2 was the first game to offer this option. But the point of the matter is it makes the game sound way better, and it also makes it easier to hear like subtle sounds such as footsteps. Overall, it just makes everything sound a lot more immersive and intense. And just in case you don't know what war tapes is, here's the difference between the regular headphone mix and the war tapes mix in Battlefield 4 and Battlefield 6.
We need you supporting the attack.
Now as you can tell, it sounds a lot more intense. You can hear subtle sounds more clearly. You may notice things seem a lot louder even though it's not really that much louder. Now I'm going to preface with I am not officially a certified audio engineer yet. I'm in school for audio engineering and I have learned a lot about audio, but it's really hard to fit all those details into a title, so I don't want you to think I was trying to mislead you. But today I wanted to point out some audio engineering techniques that were used in the war tapes mix that really help it sound more immersive and helps everything stand out more. I'll try not to get too nerdy on you and over-explain everything, but I thought it'd be fun to share some of the knowledge I've gotten in school with you guys as it pertains to Battlefield. And also at the end of the video, I'm going to give you a little advice on how to make sure you're hearing things as clearly as possible based on what kind of headphones you have. And by the way, if I've done my job right, this video might seem pretty simple, but it did take a lot of editing to go through all this, so if you enjoy this, I'd really appreciate it if you'd subscribe and like the video. We primarily talk about Battlefield, but every once in a while I'll hop in another game, or I'll do a video like this where I kind of just talk about some random shit that I wanted to show you. But with that, let's get started. Okay, so now we're in Pro Tools, and what I did here is I performed the same action in Battlefield 4 with the headphone mix on and with war tapes on. I isolated the sounds and I lined them up in their own tracks. So you can see here, here's the headphone mix track, here is the war tapes track. And as you can see, we've got like just a running sound, a flare burning, a heli being blown up, etc. So the first thing I want to point out right off the bat is you can see war tapes down here, which we generally perceive as being the louder mix. If you look at these subtle sounds like running here, you'll see that it looks a lot quieter in the headphone mix. And if I take this tool here that tells me the actual volume level of this clip, if I analyze it, it says it's negative 29.4 decibels whenever you're running in the headphone mix. Now if I go down to the war tapes version, it goes up to 21.4, so like 8 decibels louder. And I know that's confusing that it's a negative value. It's just it's a computers and editing thing. I'm not going to explain all that. And if we listen to these, here's the headphone mix. And here is war tapes. It's pretty obvious that it's louder in war tapes. However, if I go over here to the sound of a heli blowing up, which contains a lot more bass naturally, you can see that the headphone mix actually looks a lot louder than the war tapes mix. So let's see what this tool says about the volume on these two clips. The headphone mix, a heli blowing up from the same distance, mind you, is negative 12.5 decibels. If we go to war tapes, it is negative 13.4 decibels. So a decibel lower, actually. And let's listen to those side by side. And here's war tapes. So my point with this is we perceive war tapes as being louder, but it's actually not always louder, and it's actually usually only louder on the quiet or like more tinny sounds, the high-end frequency range. And to make that point even more clear, this is a parametric EQ. You don't need to know exactly what that means, but what this is going to show us is how strong the frequencies are across the whole spectrum of frequencies for both of these sounds. So down here, you're going to have your bass. Up here, you're going to have your like type sounds, the really high-pitched stuff. So here is the headphone mix on the Explosion. So as you can see, there's not a lot of high end. It kind of slopes up. and the low end gets boosted a bit. And if we switch to war tapes here, and the low end here isn't quite as boosted, but it's still, you know, pretty up there. So right off the bat here, what we can see is that in war tapes, they try to make things equally loud across the whole spectrum. And once again, if this was like an audio engineering lesson for you guys, I would explain they probably use a limiter to prevent the low end from being too loud in war tapes, which allows more room for the high end to be louder without it being too loud overall in your headphones. Okay, and my next point now, and this one's a little bit more subtle. You'll have to listen a little bit more closely to really notice this one, but it's another thing that I think is going on behind the scenes in war tapes. And I think this because if you look in Battlefield 6 at the description for war tapes, it specifically mentions distortion. Now, typically when you think of distortion, you'll think of, I don't know, maybe one of your friends yelling into their mic and it peaks and it like crackles and stuff. But in audio, subtle distortion is actually used to make audio sound better. And typically when it's this really fine-tuned, minimal amount of distortion, we actually call it saturation. And once again, I'm not going to over-explain that, but basically what saturation does is take those frequencies that a sound is made up of and kind of distorts them ever so slightly just to expand them a little bit. It just makes them sound slightly better. So for the sake of the example, I've got a little saturation plugin here. I'm not going to explain what it is or what it does really, but I've got it just completely overdriven. Because this is such a subtle effect, I figured the best way to kind of give you a taste of what saturation distortion does is to just completely overdo it. But even then, it's kind of hard to hear. So take a listen. So this is the headphone mix without any saturation. And they might have some saturation in there already, but I think what is going on in the war tapes mix is they're adding extra saturation to make it sound even more aggressive. So here is the headphone mix with way too much saturation. Like, I would never actually do this when I'm mixing music. All right, so now I'm going to play it repeatedly and I'm going to toggle on and off. When this button up here is orange, you know it's not on, and whenever it turns gray, it is on. Or you can tell by the screen here. Let's start with off. So as you can see, it sounds just a little bit more aggressive. And that saturation distortion is actually one of the biggest, I won't say secrets because like a lot of people know about it, but that's one of the most key elements in making music sound really good. And I will say, in some cases, war tapes really is just louder. They turned up certain parts of the audio mix, like footsteps and stuff, breathing, ambiance. They did turn it up a little bit as well. Because if I do the same EQ move and the saturation on the footstep mix, it's still quieter. So footsteps in the snow without the EQ and saturation. Now with both of them enabled, it's still quiet, but it sounds more like war tapes. Now the last super nerdy thing I'm going to talk about before we actually get into a clip of a game is called compression. To put it simply, compression literally just takes the louder parts of the audio and turns them down so that the quieter parts can stand out more. You'll notice if you look at the waveform here on the headphone mix, the initial explosion is really loud because they really accent the bass, but as the bass fades away, there's not much left. The tail goes away pretty quickly. But down here in the war tapes mix, it's way more even the whole way through. What I wanted to show you is the difference in sound on the headphone mix when you use heavy compression versus no compression at all. So here's the original sound. And here is the same sound with compression. See how after the bass goes away, the debris and everything falling and the echo of the explosion kind of stand out more? So let me disable it. Listen again without the compression. Now with compression. And that's that. I do have one more point to bring up, and then another fun thing that I just want to bring up about reverb. But overall, I think those are the 3 main reasons that War Tapes sound so good. It's a lot more balanced across the board. Like even just looking at the headphone mix versus the War Tapes mix, you can see that the waveforms are a lot more even across the board, whether it's explosions or just a flare burning. And up in the headphone mix, you can barely see the flare burning. The helicopter blowing up is extremely loud. Gunfire has these really sharp spikes. Whereas down here, the gunfire gets evened out a little bit. And what that allows is for you to hear the higher frequency sounds a lot better, which often includes reverb, by the way. So in short, what War Tapes does is it turns down the bassy sounds, like explosions, and that allows you to hear the more high frequency sounds like your reload sounds, footsteps, your shots echoing through a canyon. And that's why it feels so much more immersive. By the way, I just mentioned shots echoing through a canyon. That's where reverb will come in. But before I talk about reverb, I'm going to tell you about one more short little thing. This will be really easy to explain. And that's about something called sidechain ducking. And this may not be exclusive to War Tapes. I didn't really try listening to it in the headphone mix, but it's something I noticed recently about Battlefield. But I have a clip to show you here, where I'm simply driving around a buggy, but if you pay attention closely to the sound of the buggy, whenever gunshots ring out, you can hear that during every shot, whether it's a tank or a nearby soldier with an AR, you can hear the sound of the buggy being turned down slightly to make room for those gunshots or tank sounds to shine through. So take a listen to this clip real quick and just pay close attention to the sound of the buggy, especially when there's gunfire happening. Now the reason they do this sidechain ducking, turning down the buggy every time there's another sound playing over the top of it, is because the buggy takes up a lot of the same frequencies, and there's something in audio called masking, where if 2 sounds are too similar and they're playing at the same time, you won't be able to hear either one very clearly. So I thought that was a cool little effect that I noticed the other day, where they duck the audio of the buggy so that you can hear the gunshots better, which once again adds to how intense the game feels. The last thing I want to show you in this video, just because it's kind of fun, this isn't even part of War Tapes, but this one's fun because it's about reverb and it changes like how footsteps reflect the environment around you. So just a quick start here. Here is War Tapes footsteps outdoors in the snow with no reverb. Now listen what happens whenever I add some reverb. Listen to what you feel about the environment around you, even without gameplay in front of you. Like suddenly it feels like you're running inside the mouth of a cave or something. You can hear the wind outside still, but it sounds like you're in a cave, right? So now let's try to emulate a small room. So what I've done is I've turned down the decay, which is how long the reverb echoes. I've decreased the width and I added a tiny bit of pre-delay here. So now it sounds like you're in a small room. Now the wind kind of makes it feel like you're somewhere else, but you get the point. And another thing you can do to change the sound of the space around you is just adding like a really short, quick delay. Now it sounds like you're in this really echoey room with concrete walls or something. Anyways, guys, I know this was like a really weird random video, but I thought maybe it would be interesting to a lot of people. And sometimes it's kind of cool to know what's going on behind the scenes. But now, as I promised in the beginning of the video, I would give a little bit of advice on how to figure out how to hear things better if you're having trouble hearing footsteps especially. So a couple days ago, I had a friend playing Battlefield 6, and he complained to me that he was having a lot of trouble that day hearing footsteps, and he didn't really know what happened. So knowing it could come down to an EQ masking thing or just something to do with his headphones, I asked him, what kind of headphones do you have? And so once he told me, I looked up a frequency response curve for his headphones. And what this does is it shows you what frequencies do your headphones accentuate and which ones are they not very good at replicating. So his response curve here tells me it really boosts the low end sounds, but then right here in about the 2000 to maybe 8000 range, especially right in the like 9000 range, it doesn't do so well. See these dips? Well, if you look at where footsteps land in this EQ, like if we isolate them, see, that's where the footsteps are. So just based on my experience with audio, I knew footsteps probably fall right around this range. And that's probably why he's not hearing footsteps very well. It's probably boosting the bass, and it's probably not doing a very good job playing the footsteps in the first place. So then I looked around the audio mixes in Battlefield 6, and I saw that night mode, I think it was called, specifically says that it boosts higher end frequencies and doesn't accentuate the low end as much. And within his sound settings, if he clicked on his headphones and went to enhancements, he actually had a bass boost in this box because he's on Windows 10. So I told him, turn that off, turn night mode on. He went in game, and suddenly, boom, he could hear footsteps just clear as day. So if you're having trouble hearing footsteps in Battlefield 6 or any other game, try looking up your frequency response curve for your headphones. And if you have that same dip, then you might try night mode, and you might make sure you don't have any bass boosts going on in your Windows settings. But anyways, guys, I know this was like super nerdy and literally no one asked me for this video, but I thought it'd be pretty cool to show you guys a little bit of what goes on behind the scenes with sound. So if you enjoyed this, please let me know. And also remember to like the video and subscribe if you browse the channel and like what you see. With that, I hope you all have a great holiday and that you all travel safe no matter where you go this holiday. I will see you guys in the next video.